All right, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our first webinar for PTES, our first live event. Hopefully, this event will not bore you to death. So, as always, before we begin, I would like to invite one of my virtual students to read the Doa.
Okay, sebelum kita mulakan meeting pada hari ini, marilah kita sama-sama membaca doa Fatihah. Al-Fatihah. Auzubillahi Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillahirabbil alamin arrahmanir rahim maliki yaumiddin. Iyyaka na'budu wa iyyaka nasta'in ihdinas siratal mustaqim siratal ladzina an'amta 'alaihim ghairil maghdubi 'alaihim waladdallin.
Okay, so that was my student Muhammad Ashraf Uraif reading the Doa. Hopefully our event will be blessed. So let's just get right into it. How do we conduct a webinar on Microsoft Teams? Now, I found this graphic online which looked quite nice. It actually comes from one of the corporate websites that does webinars very often. Unfortunately, we only began using these platforms only when it was absolutely necessary to do so during HBL. And most of us learned all this in a hurry. Classes were held via MS Teams meetings, and I guess we learned the ropes over the course of 2 to 3 weeks. So if you are already familiar with Microsoft Teams, this will be a short refresher for you, and it will introduce you to our webinar itself. So just as a brief intro, in the past, when we wanted to use Microsoft Teams, we would load up our app and click on calendar, or we can go from our Teams themselves and click on the class. Like I would click on my CHE L4 2020 and choose to meet now. There is an option on top. But if you want to schedule a meeting for a future date, you have to click on calendar and then click on new meeting. You can schedule a meeting so your class, the members of your class will receive emails notifying them of the meeting in advance. Now that is not necessary for our classes because our classes happen every working day. And as always, we just fill up the details, set the date, the time. There's an optional one here where you add required attendees, but we don't need to do that for this case. The date and time are the essential ones. I called my class during HBL Chemistry Lab Web Lounge. It's the virtual location, so it doesn't really matter what you write down. It's just something which I feel a bit of familiarity with. And click send, and you can begin your web meeting. So that's how we ran our classes. And many of you may be asking now, why a webinar? Why not just use a meeting? So we'll come to that in a bit. So a live event or webinar has a few different functions. And in fact, most of the webinars that I attended, they had a lot of attendees. The attendees are numbering up to thousands. So they needed a bigger platform, basically. Microsoft Teams meetings can accommodate up to 250 attendees. Our classes, we had students, up to about 20 students at most, I believe. And if everyone gets a say and can use their mic to talk, you would have to spend quite a bit of time muting everyone first before you even begin your class. Only when you are asking questions, then you will simply unmute that certain student and direct the question at that student. However, in a lecture system or lecture setting, only the lecturer speaks or presents, really. Also, if you have any guest presenters, they will be the ones who speak as well. Otherwise, the audience usually just remains silent, albeit some reactions here and there. So we've already seen the meeting, the preview of how to conduct a meeting via MS Teams. If you have any questions regarding MS Teams meetings, feel free to email us as well. But for today, we want to focus on live events. So how do we create a live event? We click on the drop-down arrow up there on the little green arrow on top right. Instead of clicking new meeting, we click on the little drop-down arrow first. And then you will see two options, schedule meeting and live event. If you schedule meeting, that's the same as just clicking the blue button by itself, the plus and the new meeting. So we will choose live event instead. And it will bring you to this screen. Oh wait, actually there's another screen before this, but yeah. Now my main advantage for using a webinar is this Q&A function. You can probably use this in your meetings as well, but in the webinar setting, there will be a larger number of attendees. I believe the number has been raised from 10,000 to 20,000 attendees. So basically, this is a wider network. And there are some problems which I list out later in our table. So I've already received quite a lot of questions on our Q&A panel. And while I'm talking now, I can't really address the questions yet. So we'll leave that for later, yeah? So sorry, please patiently wait. Now, here's a few points that I've compiled that summarize the differences between meetings and live events. There are, of course, many other points that I could have listed here, but I feel these are the 5 that are really relevant to our usage. So the first one is that Microsoft Teams meetings, the attendees must all have a MS Teams license. Whereas for a webinar, this is not required. Again, this depends on the permissions set by our site administration. For PTES, I tried it, but we are not allowed to host live webinars outside of our organization. That means that if I were to invite someone from another school to join this webinar, they would not be able to join. So maybe there's a way to iron this out. So I'll have to see our resident ICT specialists for some more advice regarding this. The second point is that in MS Teams meetings, all attendees can share. So you can call on a student or a member of your meeting. You can let them share their screen and they will have control over the slides that they are presenting. And you can even give them control over your slides. I personally like the whiteboard app that is part of Microsoft Teams. Students can even draw on their own screens and it will appear to all participants of that MS Teams meeting. Unfortunately, you cannot do that in a webinar, nor would you really want to if there are thousands of attendees. It's going to be pretty messy. So in a webinar, only producers and presenters may share. I have joined this webinar as a producer. I can designate some attendees, a small number, I believe it's 2 to 3, double check that, and they will be presenters and they can share their content via their desktop screen. So think of it as having a webinar with multiple panels or segments. You have control over who gets to present at what given time. Planning is required as well, so you don't go over your time frame. The third slide, and I believe there must be a bit of a change here. I said that there was no access to Q&A panel for Teams meeting, but apparently you can. I've not actually used the Q&A panel for a meeting itself because my students are actively talking to me anyway. So it was not necessary to use a Q&A panel. Whereas in a webinar, you can have a Q&A panel that is accessible to all attendees, whether or not they are part of our organization or not. As long as they have been invited and have the link, they should be able to type questions in. So this slide here requires re-evaluation. Now, I mentioned that the attendee limit for MS Teams meetings was 250. Before, it used to be about 100, and then they raised it to 150, and after upgrading their servers, it is now 250 as of yesterday or last week, if I'm not wrong. Whereas for Microsoft Teams live events, the attendee limit has been raised to 20,000. That is a lot of participants. So if you run a live event worldwide, you can have a lot of participants. But of course, there will be problems such as your bandwidth and so forth. Yeah, I don't know whether UNN can support 20,000 members inside one webinar. For school-wide events, maybe even virtual assemblies, we could probably use a webinar. Who knows in the future? Touch wood, we don't really want to go into HBL times again, but if need be, this is an option. Microsoft Teams meetings are meant for interpersonal interactions, like a classroom setting or a workshop. Even though it is virtual, at least everyone can speak, they can say their piece, and we can work together. Whereas for a webinar, it is more one way, just like a lecture at university. I've downloaded this flowchart, or rather, it's a flowchart from the Microsoft Teams support, Microsoft.com support website. Please visit this website if you need more in-depth knowledge. And there are a lot of frames here that we seldom use. Now, my process, I use Microsoft Teams to schedule my event. Then I used other software to produce slides like Microsoft PowerPoint, Office PowerPoint. They will be the ones used for these slides here. I have prepared a video to show later as well, and that was produced by using another application. And putting them all together, we will now stream it via MS Teams, and the Microsoft Stream platform will record it as well. So at the end of this video, you can re-watch this webinar. Hopefully the file is not too big. And the rest of this, we don't really need to bother about it because that's just the internal things that happen behind the scenes for Microsoft Teams itself. One interesting thing to note is that Yammer is also available for the stream, not just Microsoft Stream itself. Personally, I think Microsoft Stream is good enough. Okay, it's not the end yet. That's just for these slides. Now I would like to show you some other content. So another thing to note is that I hope that this doesn't go over into the afternoon prayer time, but if it does, hopefully it is during the Q&A session. So the next thing to share, stop sharing for now. And I will play this video instead. So we are going now into how to create or conduct your own webinar step by step. Just click on the video first. Back, share, make sure include system audio. There we go. Send live. Okay, hopefully the video plays loud and clear. We will be answering your questions while you watch this video. So, how do we go about making our own webinars? There are a few methods, but the simplest method would be to just simply click on calendar. Remove that away. Then, for instance, I have made a test webinar for now. Now, if I want to make one for tomorrow, I will click up here. So rather than clicking here, where you'll be making a meeting, which is what we normally did for our classes during HPL, and we will have to discuss as well the differences between a meeting as well as a webinar. So to start your webinar, you will first have to click on this downward arrow here, click on it, and instead of scheduling a meeting, this is the usual meeting that we have for our classes. I'm not going to do that. Instead, click on the second option in the drop-down menu to get a live event and verify that the title on the box says new live event. Now you are setting up a live event, and you can invite attendees by copying the link once you schedule the live event that's available. You can publish it or send it in a calendar invite. I chose to email the link to all participants today via our staff emails. So for the purpose of today's webinar, I will create a second live event, a second webinar, and I'll call this Test Webinar 2, as I've already got one open right now to show you the ropes. So location, you can choose any location that you want, but I'm going to call this virtual location PTES PD Web Lounge. It's just a fancy name. You can call it anything you want, to be fair. Now, I've chosen this name because it lets you know that you are having a PD with our PD section, and a web lounge is just another phrase that I coined up to call my virtual location. Now, the organizer would be the person who is hosting this webinar, that will be using my streaming resources as a producer as well as a presenter. Now, if you are a presenter, you will get less options. You cannot invite presenters and so forth. So I'll leave myself as the producer, and I'm going to invite 2 presenters for today, and there will be Cikgu Rashida and also Cikgu Dangku Siti Nordiana. So those who you have invited as presenters will be able to share what is on their screen and control the webinar from their computer in their homes. Now this is just an example, so I'm not actually inviting any presenters because I will function as the presenter as well. Now as for time, I will schedule it for tomorrow, and the default time that they've shown here is 3:30 to 4. So I'm going to change it to 4 to 4:30, just like our current test webinar 1. And then you can provide information about the live event, a webinar to learn about webinars. You can include details here. Maybe you can include your learning objectives as well, and list them down in point form so that your audience will know what they're getting into. So these are the learning objectives. You can also include other pointers or links to notes that are kept online or videos that can be helpful to this webinar. Now once you're done with that, click on Next. And there are 2 options that are available for our IT admin. Yeah. So for our center, we are not allowed to use the public option for permissions. So it suits our purpose because we need to do an event that is organization wide as well, because this option will allow us to track those who join this webinar. If you use people and groups, you have to actually set up a group first before you invite everyone to this group. PTES. So there are a few here. PTES IT services, I can invite them. PTES library. So basically, if you want to use this option here, you will have to set up your own group first before you can actually use it. So we click on organization-wide. Now this requires the users to sign in, which means that whoever joins this webinar must sign in to their account on Microsoft Teams. Click on the link that is given in their email and join the event. Or they can just click on the link in their emails. There will be a prompt for them to sign in. And once they sign in, they will enter the meeting room, the webinar room itself. Now, as for public, you could probably ask a question in the Q&A and I'll probably answer it as well. But for public, this requires quite a lot of bandwidth, and that's probably why this was disabled. Now, once this is done, you click this, scroll down, and verify that you have these boxes checked. And for the purpose of today's webinar, we also want to enable the Q&A, question and answering panel. Now, if you enable this recording available to attendees, it says here that the live event will be recorded so attendees can watch it later. Now, these videos will be recorded and uploaded to MS Streams, or you can even download it later after you have completed the event. You can click on a button which allows you to download the file. The files are relatively small compared to what I expected, and I'll show you an example later. So, captions unfortunately are not available. So, by right, you can try to input your own subtitles using a different software, but that requires a lot of time. This attendee engagement report will let you know what the attendees have been doing, whether they submitted a Q&A, whether they put their hands up during the webinar. There's quite a lot of actions that can be taken by the attendees themselves. They can chat in the chat panels and even write down meeting notes. And this attendee engagement report will show you their activity. And this box over here, it's originally unchecked, so make sure you check it before we schedule our webinar. We are not allowed to use an external app or device for this case, but to be fair, it is better to have all your files locally. I have saved my files in a folder, so webinar files. These files are here. You can even look at the webinar that has been done before. Now, these webinars here, I use them for my upper 6 class, chemistry class. And as you can see, these files here were downloaded using this option here, the recording available to attendees. So once this is done and everything is checked, all okay, you can go back as well to check whether your details are correct, whether there's enough information here. Then click on schedule. Now, once you have scheduled, you can click this button here to get a link. Now, if you do it this way, the link will appear as a very long string of text and numbers. There is another way to get a link, and that's by simply joining the meeting itself. Even though our meeting is scheduled for tomorrow at the point of this test webinar, it's scheduled at 2:30 tomorrow. It's currently 3:24 p.m. when I'm recording this, but it's okay, I can still join it. So once you join it, I'm actually in 2 webinars now. I'm on hold for the first webinar as shown here. So I can either hang up or continue it. If your video device is off, for my case, I don't think you will get this. But since I've got it, I can just dismiss it. Don't need that. I cannot move that. Now, as you can see the panel here, there's quite a lot of things. I'm going to hang up there. So we have the title of our webinar here. Time elapsed. Thus far, 30 seconds. 0 attendees. This number will be pretty useful during the actual webinar itself. You can use it to track how many attendees are present at that given time. And also it can be used to cross-check your attendance sheet. So for this webinar, attendance is being taken using Microsoft Forms. If that number is vastly different from the number of attendees, either the attendees have logged out or are not present. So this number can be used to track your activity. Then at the moment it is labeled as pre-live, and that's because I have not shared any content yet. I have not shared any content yet. So let's look at the panels on the side. Now these panels here are for Microsoft Teams, and please do not click on them when you are creating a webinar. Just leave them alone. Now if you need more help, you can click on this and you'll open up a help file, and that help file, Edge, you can go, yes. So if you were to click on this help file over here, it will open up a help file from Microsoft's website itself. There's always a lot of good information you can find from support websites. And this article is where I got most of my information and learned how to use Microsoft Teams during our HBL times. Of course, us teachers, as I'm sure you will all know, we had to learn all this in a hurry, not just for Microsoft Teams, but for numerous other platforms and software and apps, just to help our students try to learn as much as they can despite having to learn from home. Now once you're here, you can read all these texts, all this information, what you can do and can't do with Microsoft Teams, what you can and can't do with webinars, and here is probably from here you can start. That's something for you to read, so I will skip all this because this is lots of text. Sometimes being hands-on itself is a better way to learn. So this is the button where you will click to leave. Actually, even if I do it now, I'm leaving it, it's fine. Yeah, I can always rejoin the test webinar anytime I want. I'm going to rejoin it, and I'll unmute my microphone as well. So once you're back here, again, there are two panels, a lot of panels on top. Now this panel over here shows your health and performance. This is the bandwidth that I'm currently using from my home. And if you're using a camera, you will have another set of details there. And as you can see, the number just changed. Yeah, that number will tell you how much bandwidth you're using. If you turn on the camera, that number will change drastically. So these are for my device itself, so you don't need to know about those. If your computer is pretty old, then I would suggest that you get a newer one. You need your computer to be quite healthy in order to host a live event. You can even change your camera's metrics here. Well, you can get the metrics from here and you can check out what. So media sharing is enabled for presenters as well as producers, and the bitrate limit is 50 Mbps. Now this is our limit as stated or fixed by our IT admin. Currently, I'm already using 13.82 megabits per second, and that's even before I'm sending live information. So we'll come back to this later. Once we start sharing videos and slides, it will become much more higher. So this is the Q&A panel, and in the case of my current webinar, test webinar 2, I can make an announcement as the producer. Please type in your questions here. Send that, and that will start a thread. You can reply to this thread, or you can make your own. You can type your own questions in. Now, as a presenter, I can read all the questions that are put forward by clicking here, new. So if anyone types a new question, it will appear here. Now, all these questions are subject to moderation as well. So all our presenters, producers who are present in this webinar will be able to read these questions and approve them. So there will be a button there to publish it. So once it's published, it goes in here. So any questions that are published will be put here. And once they're published, we can react to it, like it. We can delete it if the question is moderated and found to be not suitable for this webinar, or we can just leave it to be fair in the inbox. We can reply directly to the sender of the question, or we can publish it so that everyone can read the answer as well as the question. So once that's done, you will have a Q&A session. Yeah, after this webinar is done, we'll have a Q&A session for about an hour. And during the course of that Q&A session, you can type and leave questions as you will, and they will be answered by our committee as best as we can. Bear in mind that we are not professionals in this software itself, Microsoft Teams. Some tutors prefer to use other software like Edmodo, Schoology, and so forth. Even Zoom. Zoom is another platform that has been used, even though you have to pay in order to increase your webinar time. You need a corporate license for that as well. Now, interesting to note is this meeting notes. If you click on this, you can start making notes. So I'm going to click on it, and it begins my own notes for this meeting. I may be a producer, but I can listen to staff members or presenters in their presentation, and while they are taking their notes, I can write down things like Cikgu Rashida said that webinars are very helpful, and I'll just leave it at that. If you click at the bottom for Notes tab, you can see all the tabs, all the notes that have been given. You can even add a new section of a new section. You can make quite a lot of them, and these notes are like taking notes in a class. So even your students, if they join the webinar, they can type their own notes in. They should be typing notes in. This will also show that they are not just simply passively learning, but actively seeking information from our webinar. Now, once you go to this sort of screen, to get back to your webinar, you click on this panel over here. It will send you back. Again, it resets everything. And there's another chat panel. Now, this chat panel you can use to type to each other. Members of the webinar can communicate with each other. You can use all these different format of text. You can send delivery options. Is it an important one? And so forth. I don't think you should touch this, to be fair. Just send them as normal ones. You can even attach files from your computer, from your device. Emojis. Oh yes, the new generation loves these things. GIFs. You probably don't need to use these in the chat. If possible, for webinars, you should keep your chat to a minimal and make them as professional as you can. Stickers as well. Oh, there's so many options here. And there are other things you can do, like give praise to questions. That's an app, another app itself. I don't really use it, to be fair, but Microsoft Stream, you can send streams from the other apps itself. Then there are so many other suggested apps that can be used and embedded into the chat panel here. Now I'm just going to type hello, and that will begin the thread. You can react to it. As the producer, I can delete it, I can save it, I can even edit it because I was the one who sent it. You can translate it using Google Translate probably, which is embedded here. You can share the comment to Outlook. And once you're done with that, now at the moment we still have 0 attendees because this is only a test webinar for the purpose of this video. Now to add people, you can click on this. And if you remember from about 8 minutes ago, there was a link that we copied and sent. Yeah, we copied from the details of this webinar. You can also click this, and it says copy to clipboard. So you have a link in your clipboard already. Now what you can do from there is to email that link to somebody. So what I will do in my case is I will go to clipboard on the day itself. So by the time you're reading this, you have already clicked on that link. So how did I get a link? I clicked on this. I went to, so I will create a new message and I'll send it to staff 2020 PTES teachers, and I'll put the link there. So that was the link that you clicked, and it's actually quite long if you look at it. It's quite a long string of text and numbers and percentage signs and so forth. It is not advisable to click this link and send it on WhatsApp. If you do that, it will usually just turn up as a blank link. Yeah. So if you want to send this to your participants, please use email or use Microsoft Teams. Now I don't have a group set up for 2020 PTES teachers on my Microsoft Teams account, so I cannot do that. I only have groups for my classes, and that's enough for me. So if I send this link, this will be the link that you received. This will be the how to conduct a webinar PD. And I'll just send this with greetings and signature, so you will know who it is from and verify that it is not spam. Hopefully this email does not appear in your spam as well. So if I send this, you can just use this and join the webinar. So that's where I got the link from here, copy join info, and I can send it. Now in this meeting, I can view only producers and my presenters. I cannot see any other attendee. Now, those attendees appear here. The number will change when it becomes live. Finally, we have our settings panel. Now over here, you shouldn't really need to touch anything. If you are a producer or presenter, make sure your mic is muted when you are not speaking. But when it is your turn to speak, then make sure it is not muted. You can change the volume of your sound as well. And if there's a camera, of course, this can be enabled, and you can change some of your metric settings. I have been unable to use this Auditorium Mode. I guess it is not enabled for our version of Microsoft Teams. And the information pane is disabled by policies. So that is again something which we cannot use. Now, how do we share content from our computer or device? Here is a note: if you are using an iPad, you cannot host a webinar. The app of Microsoft Teams is not compatible with webinars. You can attend a webinar, but you cannot host one. So in case you want to ask that in the Q&A, I can answer that for you now. You can't. Maybe in the future, you probably will. But it is typical for apps to have less functions than the PC client versions or the MacBook versions. Handheld tablets and devices, mobile devices, are meant to be the condensed version of these apps. Make it use less resources and yet be still useful. But for the case of webinars, I'm sorry, but you cannot host a webinar from your phone or iPad or tablet. A tablet PC may be able to do that, but it depends on which model and your resources as well. Like I said, you need a high level of bandwidth, so you cannot just simply stream. So how do we share? There's a button over here. You can click, share. And I have already prepared a video. So this video is what I'm sharing with you. So you will see this video, and I can click play later. So click on it here. Once you have already clicked on share, click on the correct file or correct window. Now as you can see, my mouse is moving over here. And it's not actually on the slide, but it is on what would be the slide if I clicked on it. So let's say I clicked on the slide itself. You see my mouse is here. when I go to the test webinar, it's actually on where it is on the screen behind this screen. So I'm going to test this now and send it live. So I have already made an error because when I send the content live, I did not click a certain button. So make sure when you share, stop sharing first, share, include system audio, and then click on the file. Yeah. So it will show here that you are now sharing system audio. So whatever is heard in the video should be heard on the webinar itself. So I will now click on it. There should be audio, and as you can see, there is a bit of discrepancy between how my mouse moves on both screens. Also, it becomes it's a bit lagging, yeah, and that's normal because your stream and what you play on your computer will only be seen by your audience about 10 seconds later, or maybe even longer. It depends on your bandwidth again. So I'm going to send it live, and this is now live. Now I can now click on start, and once you start an event, you cannot stop and restart. The event can last up to 16 hours from the start time, and attendees can watch at a 10 to 20 second delay. So that's where the delay comes from, 10 to 20 seconds. So continue. The event is now live, and I can begin this.
Good afternoon, students, and welcome to this webinar on infrared spectroscopy. As always, before we start, we should look at a table of contents to see what we are going to deal with in this topic itself. We will be dealing with some prior knowledge first. We will not be looking specifically at the origins of infrared spectra. If you wish to do so, you can do so at your own pace. Now, vibrations of bonds and molecules, that seems quite abstract at the moment, so we will deal with it later. And the infrared spectral photometer itself, we don't have to know what it looks like, but we have to know schematically how it works. Now, what's more important than all of this? Of course, the users of IR. Why use IR? Why not just MS and NMR? How do we interpret IR spectra? Is it easier, harder than NMR or mass spec? What are the characteristic absorption frequencies? And at the very end, we will checklist what we know. So what do we need to know before we begin infrared spectroscopy?
So this is just an example of a webinar that I conducted with my students during our Wednesday HPL sessions a few weeks ago. So this was a lesson from a few weeks ago, and basically what I did was I recorded a video of myself talking over the slides and then recording the screen. Then during the webinar itself, all I did was play the entire lesson. A lot of planning is required before you do that, because you will have to know how long the actual lesson is. You have to know how long each segment in your table of contents will last. You have to check your speaking speed. Is there enough wait time? Are there enough pauses for the students to properly grasp the concepts that you are delivering? And if you look at the video before, the movement of the mouse or the laser pointer was a bit faster than my speech, and that was because during the webinar there was a bit of lag. This video was received or downloaded from the Microsoft Stream website itself, or from Microsoft Teams. Now I'll show you how to do that later, but for now you can see that our event is live. I can even stop sharing, and as you can see, this is still live. It's not ended yet, so I can continue sharing other things. I can share, let's say, this screen here. I can share this current screen. So this is a webinar screen of a webinar screen. Oh, look at that, it's an infinite array. So I'm looking at a webinar screen of a webinar screen of a webinar screen of a webinar screen, and so forth. It's not really a Fibonacci series there, but you can imagine that it goes infinitely all the way down. If your eyes are good enough, you can see tiny webinar screens. Now, when this is still live, it has not ended yet, so don't click on this yet. You can let the Q&A panel be active. You can leave this online for 16 hours, if I'm not wrong, and answer questions from the event. But once you reach 16 hours, this event will be automatically ended. So for the case of this webinar, you can look at the meeting notes that you have taken yourself. I think this is personalized, so it depends on your panel. If you are an attendee, you will see your own notes. These are only mine. The chat panel will be for everyone, and the Q&A is also for everyone. But don't be surprised if your question does not appear. That is either because someone else has asked the same question and we publish theirs first. We don't want to have double answers for the same question. Or if your question is irrelevant to the live event, or we cannot answer it. Usually we will vet every single question and accept all of them. If we cannot answer, we'll just let you know we cannot answer. Okay, so I apologize in advance if there are any questions that are not answered. Hopefully we'll have enough time to tag everyone. So if, let's say, 7 people ask the same question or a similar question, we will just tag them to the answer that we have tagged for someone else. Now once that is done, once your live event is satisfactory, completed already, our target was for 2 hours, so the webinar itself should last about 50 to 60 minutes. Then we have an hour for people to ask questions at their own leisure time. You can continue chatting with each other as well in this chat panel here. So this becomes a bit of a discussion, a professional dialogue, so to speak. Now let's assume that the 2 hours are already over, and I will click on end. And there's a warning there. If you end the event now, you cannot restart the event. I've made this mistake before during previous tests, and I've ended the event and I did not get what I want. So I had to restart and make a new webinar and record the files again. So this is test webinar 2. It says webinar 2, but I think this is my 8th or 9th try. Troubleshooting and debugging is always something you should do before and after any lesson anyway. It's the same for online material. So I'm going to end this event. So once it's ended, you will see this blank screen again. We can ignore all these notifications here. Usually I always click them away. Then what can we do from here? I can go back to my calendar. I can click on this webinar over here. As you can see, my test webinar 2. The files, it seems that there's nothing different here, but if you scroll down, I have a Q&A report that I can download using this arrow here. So this Q&A report will let you know who has asked questions, who asked which questions, and whether they were answered or not. The attendee engagement report, there will be an Excel file of what each attendee did. Did they type a note? Did they ask a question? Or did they type something in the chat panel? So if you click on advanced options, oops, there's nothing here yet. It takes a while. So after a given amount of time, this recording for attendees will change into a downward arrow, and you can download it. If I click on disable, oops, I can do it. Yeah, I can't do anything here yet because the file is not available yet. I think the recording has to be done by attendees as well. Yeah, it cannot just be us. Refresh it, there's nothing there, so I gotta wait longer for this. And once that is done, you can edit it, or it cannot be edited once you have already started it. So there's nothing we can do. Now, according to the time here, it is still running, so I will have to record it a bit later. So I can leave this now. You can finally just click here again, click on the webinar, and eventually this recording will appear. You see, now it's appeared already. If you click on this recording, then you will get your file. And the file that I showed you just now, this file over here, these files, they're quite small. Now this is a 92.6 megabyte file, and that's a 15-minute video. The webinar itself is longer, so there are chunks of it. Yeah, this webinar 5 minutes, there's a 9 minutes 50 seconds there. So depending on how long your webinar is, that's roughly the size there. So that's 92.6 megabytes in 15 minutes. 92.6 divided by 15.75. That's about 6 megabytes per minute. So for every 1 minute webinar, the file size will be about 6 megabytes. So you can do the math there and you will get your file. I've actually shrunk my file as well, so I'll have to check that. So the file that you download may be larger than what I've just said. So once you are done there, you have all these things. You can refresh it until the recording is available, save it, and you can review it for your future purpose. Let's say a staff member missed this webinar. They could use the recording, review it, make their own notes, and still get credit for this webinar. Hopefully everyone is here, because this webinar here is for the whole school, for the entirety of PTES. Now once that is done, you can close this and your calendar will be cleared for the day. I hope this webinar was helpful for our PTES staff. We plan to use these as platforms for future professional development sessions. If you have a webcam, that will help a lot. You have a stream down at the corner here. You can insert a stream down here so you can see your face as well. It becomes a bit more personal. Sometimes students feel that if they are just listening to a screen with no face, it gets a bit dull. It's like we're doing research on the internet and talking to an AI all the time. For example, the best AI that we know is Google. But if you add a live stream of yourself talking during the event itself, it becomes a lot more personalized, and hence it will be easier to pay attention. So that's it for this webinar. So we are now officially opening up the Q&A session. So go nuts. And thank you very much for your kind attendance. During the Q&A session, there will be a slideshow in the background, so you can look at the slides that were mentioned in this webinar itself. Thank you very much for your kind attention. We hope this webinar has been helpful. Okay, that concludes our video. And now I will play the slides again. I'll leave it as a slideshow. Sorry, let me redo that. Let's take from beginning. Now we open up the Q&A panel. So if you have any questions, you can start typing away. Otherwise, you can just pick up a bun like I am now, have a snack, have a coffee, maybe even chat with your friends. Unfortunately, we cannot have chat in this webinar itself. That is only available in our Microsoft Teams meeting. That is one of the drawbacks of a webinar, I guess. So it's up to you really, whether you want to use a Microsoft Teams meeting or a Microsoft Teams live event / webinar. Personally, I feel that we should just try and use as many of these as possible. will stop talking now, and I'll just be answering questions on the Q&A panel. And while I'm answering questions, you will also be listening to some music.